Jonathan, I think most people have been aware of what happened on the very first day of this war, but I think the full story of what happened in Manab at this primary school has not really got out from here because it has been so hard to get here to tell that story. It's very difficult to get access to Iran, and getting here for us took 4 days of travel. It's been very difficult to get access because of the security situation. So we are the first journalists from outside Iran to come here. We've been here for a week, and I think it's fair to say it's been a very hard story to report on. It's been very difficult talking to the people here, but they are crying out for their voices to be heard. And it's a story of, terrible tragedy, unspeakable horror, really, and a story that I think is crying out for answers and for justice. This is what we've discovered here in a week of filming, as I say, and just a warning to people, for obvious reasons, some of this report is very distressing to hear. Dawn, deep in the south of Iran. We're reaching the end of a 4-day journey, heading for a place now infamous in the story of this war. As we enter the town of Minab, there are reminders everywhere of its terrible tragedy. We've come to the primary school that was hit on the first day of the conflict by precision-guided American missiles. We're the first journalists from outside of Iran to film here since the attack. There are still so many unanswered questions about what happened here. We meet brothers Fazl and Reza, who rushed to help after the missiles came in.
We were faced with an unbelievably horrifying scene. There were pieces of bodies everywhere. Hands, heads, a child's torso without limbs, all burned. All of this area was full of body parts. We were terrified and in shock. We were wondering if we were in a nightmare or awake and couldn't believe what we were seeing.
The missiles struck in the middle of the morning when the school was full of children, causing enormous loss of life. Staff of the school had already realised that Iran was under attack that morning and called parents to take their children home. Most of them didn't get here in time. Survivors say that most of the children, the girls on the upper floor of the school, were moved to that end of the building to a prayer room for their safety. When the missiles struck, they killed many children and teachers on impact, but they also tragically collapsed completely that end of the school, trapping and killing many more. 11-year-old Parastesh was on the school's upper floor when the missiles landed. She somehow survived but was badly injured. Her little brother, 9-year-old Ali Asghar, was killed. She showed us his toys and his backpack found in the rubble and told us how she raced to help him that morning before a second explosion tore them apart.
اینجوری دستمو میخواستم بذارم رو شونش که بیارم طرف خودم که دومی رو زد پرد شد. خیلی فاصله نبود که دیگه بهش برسم. میخواستم بیارم سمت خودم، فکر میکردم اگه بیارم سمت خودم در امانه.
Parastesh was found under rubble on the floor below. She was severely burned and spent weeks in hospital recovering. Jawad, their father, told us how proud he'd been of his son.
بیشترم عاشق فوتبال بود، با عاشق مدرسه بود. مدرسه رو خیلی دوست داشتم، با فوتبال دنبال من می اومد. دوست داشت همیشه با بزرگترا بشینه، نه با کوچیکا. اینجوری بود.
The loss of Ali Asghar, he says, is impossible to take in.
من حقیقت تا الانم باور ندارم که پسرم نیست و شهید شده. تا الانم باور ندارم. دیگه تا هنوزم باور ندارم که علی اصغر نیست. حس میکنه همیشه تو خونه است.
Minab has had to extend the town's cemetery to bury all the dead. They come here every night to hold vigil for their children. This is actually quite overwhelming. Child after child, grave after grave, and almost 3 months on, the families still coming every evening to spend hours by their children's graveside. And talking to some of them, of course, is deeply moving. Mohammed Taha should have been celebrating his 10th birthday this night. Instead, his mother Khadija and family are by his grave mourning him.
دوست دارم یه بار شده ببینمش بغلش بار صداشو بشنوم ذوق کردناشو میدونم اونجا خیلی جاش خوبه ولی من دلتنگش
They made a cake for Mohammed. Happy birthday, they sang. May you live for 100 years. If there is an explanation for this atrocity, we haven't heard it yet. The evidence points to America. Iranians say these are pieces of US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles collected at the site. And we know America attacked several other places nearby that day. Whatever other targets there were in the area, the point to stress is this was a primary school. It had been for more than a decade and was clearly marked on maps. And yet it was struck, it seems, right in the centre of the building by missiles that are accurate within a few metres. It was either deliberately targeted, which would be a war crime, or it was misidentified, potentially equally a breach of the rules of war. Now, after similar incidents in Iraq and Afghanistan, America has admitted responsibility within a few days or at the most a few weeks. All it said for almost 3 months now is this is being investigated. They are stalked here by the spectre of war returning. It's not at all clear to what extent this appalling tragedy is being investigated and what's been learned to make sure nothing like this can happen again if hostilities resume.
Well, in a moment, we'll get reaction from our US correspondent Mark Stone in Washington. But first, back to Dominic in Minab. Dominic, when you arrived as the first Western journalist on the scene, how willing were parents to talk to you about their grief and, of course, their anger?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say everyone here has been happy to talk and actually eager to talk because they wanted to express and tell the outside world what they've been through. And I think, you know, they are desperate for some kind of explanation. And so talking to people from outside, they're hoping, they've been saying to us, what on earth do you think happened here? How could this have happened? You know, they're traumatised, they're grief-stricken, they are in deep shock. You know, imagine your town being hit by Tomahawk missiles right into the middle of a primary school. Imagine the impact that would have on anybody's town. And this is a small town. It has been literally torn apart emotionally. So it's not been difficult to get people to talk, but it has been difficult and harrowing, obviously, listening to their testimony. To give you an idea, Jonathan, we've just done a much longer interview with Khadija, who is the mother whose son Mohammed Taha's birthday, it was a few days ago, who we interviewed briefly at the side of her grave. And she spoke for well over 2 hours just now, with tears literally rolling down her cheeks for most of those 2 hours, talking about what she had been through. Her son was on the ground floor. The ground floor of this school was the boys. Upstairs was the girls, as I said in that piece to camera. So a lot of the boys, you know, if they were where the missile came in, there literally wasn't much left of them. And we heard from Fazil there, that bystander who came here to help and obviously been traumatised by the horrors he saw here. This whole area was covered in the body parts of children, not to put too fine a point on it. And Khadija had to go to morgue after morgue and go through the body parts of children. Eventually, DNA testing identified a piece of torso and a piece of arm of her 9-year-old son. She was handed that with her husband, wrapped in a shroud. She told us that she hugged it and sang what remained of her son Mohammed a lullaby before they buried him. very difficult testimony to tell, but the people here want for the world to hear it because they want to have answers. Because so far, and it seems like the Americans must have been behind this because these were Tomahawk missiles and they were attacking a number of targets, it seems, in the area. As I said in that piece to camera, they have not given any explanation beyond saying that this is being investigated. Having heard, we did hear from Donald Trump at the beginning of the war saying that Iran was behind this, which clearly was a falsehood, and he presented no evidence to back that up. All we've heard, apart from a preliminary report where the Americans think that they were behind it, they've not publicly admitted that they were responsible. And I think for people here, that's compounded their grief and obviously compounded their yearning for some kind of justice for what happened here.
Yeah, and that leads me on to my next question, really. What have people you've been speaking to said about how they view the war and, indeed, the Iranian regime's response to it?
Well, just to give you an idea, Khadija, who we just spoke to, at the end of this very moving interview, she said, I said, have you got a message for Americans? Have you got a message for Donald Trump? And she said, well, Donald Trump said that he was going to bring help to the oppressed people in Iran. Obviously, a reference to what he said at the beginning of the protest that tore the country apart, led to massive unrest across the country in January and February, that then led to a brutal crackdown by the authorities here. And she said that he promised help for the oppressed and instead has killed school children. And for her, it makes no sense at all and has added to her anger and confusion, and to everyone's here, I think, as well. So, people, I think, feel that they don't understand and can't make sense of what's happened. But the other, real sense of, I think we've had here is a sense of fear that this war is currently suspended. There's a ceasefire. There's a real risk, because we are very close to the Strait of Hormuz, which has become the epicenter of this conflict, of if the war resumes and the sort of drumbeat we're getting from Washington is heading in that direction, then this could happen again. And I think that puts even more pressure on whatever investigations underway in the Pentagon to learn the lessons from here, because clearly something went terribly wrong, unless this was a deliberately targeted attack, which seems unlikely. But if this investigation doesn't reach conclusions quickly, as I said in that report, then Americans won't have learned from what's happened here. And the fear, obviously, for Iranians here is that what happened here could happen across the country. And in that, the beginning of the conflict here, we saw a lot of civilians being hurt. We went to hospitals in Tehran, where we met a number of civilians. We interviewed a mother whose daughter was dying in intensive care. There was a lot of collateral damage, the terrible term that the military use in Tehran. This seems to have been something much more direct. And I think the fear for Iranians is, unless the Americans can learn from what's happened here, learn from this tragedy, there's a very real risk of it happening again if hostilities resume.